On January 22nd of 2020, The Guardian released an article revealing that Jeff Bezos, the founder and owner of Amazon Incorporated, had been hacked in 2018 using the malware Pegasus 3. The malware was installed on his phone after receiving a video from Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia via WhatsApp. The message was nothing unusual because the two men had formerly carried on correspondence seemingly benign. Almost 2 years later, Bezos figured out about the breach and had his security team look into it, which is who revealed the connection between bin Salman and the breach. Because of the accusations, the UN looked into it and found similar results. The Saudi Arabian government denied any involvement. However, Saudi analysts proposed that that breach was part of an effort to halt negative coverage of Saudi Arabia from the Washington Post, which was also owned by Bezos. This was only one hack of thousands that happen every year. However, it shows us that not even the title of richest man in the world can, not even the title of richest man in the world was enough to protect Bezos. This is only one of several security risks possible that our government has done little to protect consumers from. So hello, I am Annemarie Hoffzimmer, and here I'm going to present to you, you think Big Brother is watching you, it's actually these guys, an analysis of how current government regulations for internet giants are insufficient. So in order to keep this thesis reasonably in time and also in content, we have a couple limitations. First, we'll only be discussing internet giants, specifically Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Second, we will only be discussing regulations from the United States, specifically the Federal Trade Commission, as it is the only impacted governance in the United States. We will also not be including any politics or suggesting solutions because both of these issues are extremely complicated and not directly pertinent to the discussion. First, let's take a look at some corporate histories to cover some background to help us understand the topic better. Facebook was launched in 2004 as a social media site, but throughout its years of existence, there have been various concerns of privacy and legality throughout its history. Some of the examples of these are the newsfeed feature, beacon ads, mood manipulation experiments, and Cambridge Analytica breach, all of which will be looked at closer later in this discussion. Next, we have Amazon, which was launched in 1994 as an online bookstore. This later evolved into the Amazon marketplace that most of us are familiar with. Throughout its years, Amazon has bought and created several subsidiaries, such as the Amazon Web Services, which will be important later in this discussion. In 2018, Amazon was both #1 in e-commerce, but also had a breach of 1 million people through the Capital One breach that we will also look at. Google was launched in 1998 as a search engine similar to what we know it as today. Subsidiaries that it has acquired over the years include DoubleClick and YouTube. Even back in 2009, Google had over 1 billion searches per day, making it the most used search engine on the internet. Later, Google restructured as Alphabet Incorporated. However, for the purposes of this thesis, we will be looking at Alphabet and Google as the same entity. So if I say Google, that is in reference to Alphabet, but just to not confuse anybody, I won't be using Alphabet. And then later in 2018, a bug led to the shutdown of Google+, which also resulted in a large security breach. So think to yourselves, how many of you use Amazon once a month or Facebook once a week? And even if you think, okay, so you don't use Facebook, you probably use Instagram at least once a week because that's part of Facebook. Also, how many of you use Google once a day? As you can see, this pertains to you because you use all three of these companies very often throughout your lives. In fact, over 89% of Americans use the internet daily, yet the government does little to protect consumers from the control of these giant internet corporations. So today we'll be discussing how the current government policies play out that we can see through monopolies, data breaches, and a lack of corporate ethics. So a monopoly is defined as complete control of an entire supply of goods or of a service in a certain area of market, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Though none of these three companies meet the exact definition provided by Merriam-Webster, they are all essentially monopolies because, which we will look at in a moment, but current regulations have not hindered their growth at all. So a little bit of background specifically for our monopolies is the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. It was established to abolish monopolies that restrict commerce and competition within an industry. Specifically, it was established for things such as the railroads, Standard Oil Trust, the Steel Trust, etc., which you can see pictured here in our comic. However, even though this Antitrust Act was very useful back in the 19th and 20th centuries, much has changed over the past 100 years, and the 21st century has new business models that make the Sherman Antitrust Act outdated. So Amazon is known to most as the convenient online marketplace where we can go buy things and have it delivered very quickly to us. However, the overwhelming expansion not only of the marketplace, but also in virtually every other industry from Amazon is not necessarily known to the common public. For example, did you know that Amazon owns Whole Foods Market, Amazon Web Services, Ring Video Doorbell, Zappos.com, Amazon Alexa, PillPack, and Twitch. So to review, Amazon controls industry-leading brands from everything home security, pharmaceuticals, and groceries. It covers everything in our lives. So even though Amazon does not control 50% or more of a single industry, it controls over 50% of industries, which makes it a monopoly in my opinion. The next example did violate the Sherman Antitrust Act, but only just barely. In 2008, Google attempted to pair with Yahoo through Google's ad services. The advertising space agreement between the two companies would allow Google to buy Yahoo's advertising space and display its own service there. The Department of Justice immediately threatened to file a suit against both companies for unreasonably restricting trade and purposefully monopolizing the industry of online ads, which were two specific parts of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Department of Justice also warned both companies against any further moves to expand that could result in an antitrust suit. In refutation, none of these companies fit the legal definition of a monopoly, therefore they're not monopolies. And these companies, even though they're big, they have absolutely no harm to the economy and we should leave them be. Because the United States is capitalist, both of these companies' growth should be rewarded and not hindered further by regulations. However, like I said earlier, the legal definition has become outdated because of the new business models that we see. The Sherman Antitrust Act was created for brick and mortar companies, not for online companies that owned part of every industry. Also, just because the government does not have a law against something does not mean that that thing is okay. The government does not dictate morality. Morality should dictate what our government's laws are. And also, these big companies, though they may not harm the economy through numbers, they do bar small businesses from breaking into any internet-related industries or any of these other industries like we saw with Amazon, because they have such a complete control of the industries. Lastly, the Federal Trade Commission does exist for a reason. It was created to help protect consumers, when businesses such as Amazon and Google got out of hand. Next, we're going to look at data breaches. The total magnitude of breaches each month is incalculable, simply because the number of people affected is not the only part of magnitude, but also how these people are affected throughout their lives. First, we're going to look at the example of Cambridge Analytica. In 2016, Cambridge Analytica stole the data of over 87 million users from Facebook. The way that this happened was that Cambridge Analytica installed a third-party personality quiz on Facebook. When people took this quiz, Cambridge Analytica would take not only the person who took it data from their profile, but also all of their Facebook friends. From this data, Cambridge Analytica decided who in this group would be determined a persuadable. And from a persuadable would be anyone who would be likely to vote either or in the upcoming presidential election of 2016. From here, Cambridge Analytica used targeted political ads to persuade these persuadables to vote in the way that Cambridge Analytica saw fit. Overall, 87 million users' information was in Cambridge Analytica's system, and the overall effect of Cambridge Analytica's actions is impossible to measure. Facebook is not at fault here for the breach happening necessarily, but it is at fault for not notifying its users, but also for not correcting a known system flaw that they had. So the flaw that Cambridge Analytica exploited was already known by Facebook. And here you can see a comic where Mark Zuckerberg is a police officer trying to direct people's attention away from the fact that Facebook has killed the objective truth. Next, we have the Capital One breach. The S3 cloud was a big cloud created by Amazon Web Services, created for the purpose of storing commercial data. It was hacked in 2019 by Paige Thompson, who is a software engineer who used to work for Amazon Web Services. She was part of the group that helped create the S3 cloud and therefore knew its weaknesses. She posted the info of 100 million users' data that she had stolen on the internet, which left it at risk for anybody to find. In reputation, it's absolutely impossible to prevent data breaches because you don't know when one is going to come or from where it will come. And also, the government is unfamiliar with the technology used in the breaches and also that is being breached. Therefore, they're unable to properly regulate any security legislation. However, prevention was possible in both of these cases. Facebook could have fixed the known flaw in their system, and Capital One could have used a preventative measure such as auto-encryption to keep their own engineers from being able to access the stored information. Current laws, in a way, lead to breaches simply because of the leniency in security requirements. Because the companies are not required to have more severe security, it's like leaving your door unlocked at your house when you have a big screen TV in the window. In our comic here, it's a man reading a privacy policy, and it says, "We don't really know what data we have about you or what we're doing with it. When we figure this all out, we will let you know." Our last point is corporate ethics. Because companies are so large, they believe that everyday morals no longer apply to them. In our comic here, it's a boss telling his employee, "I'd like you to do a presentation on business ethics. If you don't have time to prepare something, just steal it off the internet." This comic shows how companies are very adamant on displaying that they have some form of ethics, but they don't actually follow through with that. So let's go back and look at the numerous security concerns from Facebook. In 2007, Beacon Ads was launched, which collected and shared user info without user consent, which created targeted ads for the users. This was only shut down in 2009 after a $2.5 million lawsuit against Facebook. Later, Facebook allowed a group of researchers to conduct a mood manipulation experiment on their users. This was also done without user consent and tracked how targeted ads affected one user and then how that mood spread through Facebook. Facebook condoned and allowed both of these to happen, even though they knew that both were illegal. Next, we have Google's censorship. So Google subtly restricts free speech. First, through web placement. Because 95% of Google users don't look past the first 5 results when they search something, the placement of a website can easily decide whether a website succeeds or fails. And Google has been known to place conservative websites lower on the web placement than liberal websites, even if the two are exactly equal. PragerU is a video company that produces videos with the purpose to provide a Judeo-Christian perspective to oppose liberal bias taught to young people. On YouTube, which is their main platform, over 200 of their videos have been restricted. Normally, YouTube's restriction feature is only used for videos that feature excessive violence or other inappropriate behavior. However, neither of these descriptors fit any of the PragerU videos. Therefore, this year, PragerU has decided to sue YouTube and for the unfair restriction of their videos. Lastly, we have the Amazon anti-employee treatment. Satellite navigation tracking, when you first hear the term associated with Amazon, you probably assume that this is something that they use for their packages to keep track of them. But in actuality, satellite navigation tracking is used to track the employees in Amazon warehouses. And also, Amazon requires each employee to complete a certain number of subtasks per second. And each of these is to ensure maximum efficiency in Amazon warehouses. In Pennsylvania during summer 2018, the heat in one Amazon warehouse was up to 110 degrees, yet the managers of the warehouse insisted that efficiency remained the same as any other day. Because of this, the local paramedics kept a line of ambulances outside of the warehouse for any heat stroke victims for the several heat stroke victims throughout that week. Here in the comic next door, there's a bot from an Amazon employee bot tweeting that everything is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with the money I make or the way that I'm treated at work. Below that is a comic that features Amazon holding a gun to Amazon employees' back, saying, "That's it, big smile, everybody's happy." In reputation, corporations know what's right from wrong, and each corporation has their own government or has their own company ethics. Also, if consumers don't like the way that a company is handling things, they can easily boycott the company to keep them in line. Lastly, companies know technology best, and so their technology they should determine what happens with their own technology and how it is used. However, corporations have proven time and time again that they cannot be trusted. We have seen that all throughout today's presentation. Also, it's impossible to boycott the internet because the internet is the best method today is the easiest method today for reaching a large group of people in a short amount of time. Because this is how most boycotts are organized, it's almost impossible to boycott anything on the internet without actually being able to use the internet. To review, it's easy to see how government regulations are insufficient in each of these 3 areas. Several corporations have basically become monopolies. Data breaches that are preventable occur every day. And a corporate lack of ethics can be found in each of these 3 government giants. To leave, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Dave Eggers. Dave Eggers wrote The Circle back when the internet was only just becoming the start of things. He accurately predicted in his book how our lives would be controlled by these internet companies. He says, "Does it seem like a good idea to you that a private company would control the flow of all information?" Thank you.
Okay, Nicole, that was awesome. It was really great.
So tell me, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Pritchard.
No, I was gonna ask you, what do you think about that cartoon where it said, "Nothing to see here," you know, the cartoon there? How much of an influence do you think any employer has on their personnel? And how much do you think that, would you say that the employer has a right to track the employee within its facility?
So I think that tracking an employee, like their exact location, is most likely going to become more common in the future. And it's something that Amazon is doing right now. So in the future, I think we could easily see, like 10 years ago, we wouldn't have said that targeted ads is okay. But I think 10 years from now, we will probably say that employee tracking is okay. For today, I don't think it is okay. And it's treating the humans more like robots than humans by expecting the absolute maximum efficiency from them.
Okay.
So tell me, am I supposed to feel better after watching that? Or?
Probably not.
Yeah. Nice job. I haven't seen this whole thing all put together. Of course, I've read the paper, but I haven't seen the whole thing put together. I would suspect that editing this down to get your arms around this magnitude of information was probably the most difficult of the challenges you had. Am I correct?
It was definitely high up on that list. There's lots of companies that I could have used for examples, and so it was difficult to narrow it down to the biggest problems.
And that brings me to my question, I guess. What we saw was just a kind of a turn back of a one small corner of three big companies. You know, we don't even know what these other littler companies that may not even have these resources, what they're doing. And to what extent they're controlled by the actions of these large companies. My question is, do a lot of these smaller companies, like you mentioned Zappo, owned by Amazon, okay? So you've got that online, shoe clothing retailer.
Correct.
How do those companies that are owned by these giants, how do they impact the smaller mom and pop companies that aren't controlled by them? I mean, those big companies just have unlimited resources to throw at them. Do you see any evidence of those smaller companies being driven out of business, even though they're not in brick and mortar companies maybe?
So I didn't research that exactly, but I did see, like I talked about how because these companies are so large, it's blocking smaller businesses from being able to break into the industry. So because companies like Zappos have so much money that they can use for marketing or improving their products and research, etc., the smaller companies that only have a limited amount of startup can be easily hurt in the process.
Okay.
Annemarie, good job. This was very informative. I was curious about your mention in your first point of these monopolies that are being formed, and the advantage that these companies have in the marketplace, in their own kind of niche and specialty. So, as far as as capitalism goes, that you mentioned in your refutation and your response with the Federal Trade Commission and things like that, what you mentioned was the Federal Trade Commission helps businesses not get out of, or when businesses get out of hand, that's when the Federal Trade Commission comes in and helps out helps the consumer, I guess.
Correct.
So what needs to happen to these corporations? In your opinion, what is the kind of the end result for Google, Facebook, Amazon and what can we do as a capitalist nation to keep them accountable?
I think the first step that would be best for, I guess, the country overall would just be either updating the Sherman Antitrust Act or putting into effect some other anti-monopoly legislation that's just been updated for how our world is today. So because they could not, when they first created the Sherman Antitrust Act, there was no way that they could dream of, the internet and Google, etc. So I think an updated legislation for that would be the first thing. But I think it would also be good if somehow, how do I say this? If somehow these companies were restricted to one industry or one or two areas of expertise instead of being able to control something in every industry.
Would that apply to, national? Of course, these are global industries. But let's say I'm a business owner in Huntsville, and I've got several. I got my fingers in this kind of business. I got my fingers in this kind of business, and I'm an entrepreneur, so to speak, and I've maybe kind of
Diversified.
I'm diversified, yeah, and I'm doing really well. Does that apply to local businesses who are kind of doing their thing and not running others out of business, but kind of cornering the market, so to speak? Or does it only apply to international, global things like Amazon? Is it the big guys or is the little guys too? I mean, where does that apply?
I would say with like smaller local businesses that aren't necessarily franchised or they're only in one city or state or area of the country, that it shouldn't be as big of a deal. I think that like mainly this would apply to the big companies like Google and Amazon, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Got another question. One of the hot topics these days is the term corporate ethics. And the argument, and I think it's to some extent a valid argument, can be made that corporations / companies are inherently amoral entities. How do you address that argument in context of what you're saying?
I think that as a whole, corporations are amoral, but every corporation, every organization is made up of individuals who should have their own moral codes. And so there are some actions that are simply immoral, and so it's neither right nor wrong to do them. But there are also ways of getting what you want that are not moral. And I guess leaders in the company overall should be saying, nope, that's not what we need to be doing.
Okay, I'll buy that.
So, Nicole, I have a question for you about the idea that we as a government, we're paying our taxes for the government to be able to protect us supposedly and be on our side. And yet the government jobs, those kinds of jobs that would be doing that protection, those people are often the lowest paid people in a given field. So what do you think or do you think it matters that the government has that lack of expertise in their employees?
I think it probably does matter to an extent because it's difficult to do your job if you don't know what you're doing, I guess I would say. And it's also unfair to people to expect them to know how to do something if they're not given the proper resources to do that. So I think they should, how do I say this? Yeah.
Do you think it's a worthwhile thing, a worthwhile goal for our government to have, to be on the lookout and trying to actively hire people with greater expertise?
that's generally a good idea, yes, for not just for the government, but for any business, is just to constantly, oh, you would be a good fit here. So something along those lines, yes.
Anybody else have any questions? No. On a side note, Leah, you certainly look more relaxed, and I'm assuming Tori and Emily have the same look about them as well. And Nicole, I suspect you will have that same look here in about 10 minutes. Great job. Great job. Enjoyed that. Like I said, I'm not quite sure if that's a real feel-good presentation. I have to, the jury's still out on that. So,
Lawrence, I
thanks a
think
bunch,
Rachel
Nicole.
had a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think Rachel might have had a question.
Oh yeah, go.
I do have a question. I didn't know it was on mute. So my thing is that I actually never understood how the political agenda went about. And even when you read like a news article, they're not very clear on how they're getting all this information. So I actually learned something new, but I still see a lot of people on Facebook doing those online quizzes. And I was just curious if Nicole thought that they're trying to maybe cover exactly how they're pulling the information from us. Because I'm like all the other ones, I'm like, oh, it's a very cute personality quiz. I'll take it. Even though I may not necessarily believe in it, it's still fun to do. I had no idea they were pulling all that information out of me.
Right. Well, it's not necessarily every personality quiz you see. It was just that this company used that as used that method to pull your information. But I believe that since then, especially because of how much trouble Facebook had recovering the data, they did fix that one particular error. Does that mean that all personality quizzes are safe or they're all evil? Not necessarily. So it doesn't, yeah.
Yeah. Again, that doesn't make me feel a whole lot better that we don't exactly know what's out there.
Well, understood.
Yeah, the phrase "we don't know what we don't know" certainly comes into play here.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ignorance is bliss, Matt said.
Yeah. So I guess we were truly happy then. Anybody else? Nicole, thanks a bunch. Excellent job.
Thank you. And thank
Great
you.
job. Very, very unique. Good job. And we will see everyone later.
Great job.